Maybe the hottest piece of legislation at the Idaho State House is on its way to the governor's desk. The Idaho Senate have passed House Bill 406 with only one Republican giving it a red light. Well, the legislation would add fentanyl to the list of drugs in Idaho that carry a mandatory minimum sentence. It would also create the crime of drug-induced homicide. In short, if you give someone an illegal drug and it kills them and you know you gave it to them, you can be held accountable. The bill's created a lot of discussion and concern, not only for what lawmakers say are the repercussions of the potential law, but also the personal repercussions for taking a stand and voting against it. Andrew Bartline dives right in.
The month-long debate over fentanyl mandatory minimums
went back and forth probably a dozen times on this.
Was just the public portion
incredibly intense
of a second silent discourse
on a bill that I'm having the most difficulty with.
Lawmakers held against themselves.
Hints that some out there might run negative ad campaigns against us since as early as October, before we even had bills in front of us.
The decision between following that inner voice,
weighed on my conscience because I want to get this right,
or listening to the sounds of ruffled campaign dollars.
It is an election year, as we all know, and that's the time where things get ugly. It's very hard. Anyone that votes against this bill, it will be spun.
Lawmakers explain their problems with the legislation.
This is not a black and white issue.
But it wants to create a black and white law. Judges would be forced to pass down mandatory minimum sentences for fentanyl dealers, where closing a conviction is simple as carrying enough weight. Intent to sell is not needed.
I, too, went back and forth on this bill.
Some even found opposite ends of the pendulum within the same hour.
This bill is flawed, and flawed in some fairly significant ways.
I wish we could send this bill to the amending order and do the difference between a user and a real trafficker.
But come time to vote for both Representative Boyle and Cannon, they shaped up for a green light.
House Bill 406 has passed House.
And they're just a pair of many more, meaning money talks.
This is not the end of the conversation.
Idaho Attorney General Raul Labrador and Secretary of State Phil McGrain addressed these campaign funding threats in a letter to registered lobbyists, saying, quote, "Recent weeks have seen an unusual increase in questions regarding bribes and threats related to the legislative decision-making process." The letter reminded them of criminal consequences.
I'm embarrassed at some of the things that have happened surrounding this bill. And I'll just leave it at that.
But the lobbyists aren't in the business of letting up.
I don't go home every night and study the legislative advisor book.
Senator Scott Herndon posted this video on Twitter last night.
Well, then
he's since deleted it, but it shows on a completely separate bill the state's warning went to waste.
If, Idaho Power, it doesn't like what you're doing to their business, then you might stir up IACI because they're part of IACI, the Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry, and they might spend more money against you again your re-election. Idaho legislative advisor threatens me.
Evidently, it's enough to win the internal battle of some lawmakers.
Very difficult to really vote how you want to vote on this bill.
Sending the public message, always pay your campaign first.
Which is really a lot of pressure, very unfortunate that gets put upon to us to pass a bill that way.
We've worked to find lawmakers who would peel back the curtain, explain exactly who's threatening to throw money at an opponent the next campaign cycle if you vote no on this bill. So far, no takers to go on the record. We're left with what can only be described as speaking in riddles for some, leaving breadcrumbs for others at best. Maybe the bill would have passed anyway, Joe. A lot of moderate Republicans typically like mandatory minimums. A lot of people vocally supporting the bill. It's not like everyone who greenlit this is getting these sort of interactions with lobbyists. It does have support, but we'll never know if nobody talks.
Okay, so I guess we'll put out the invitation right now. If you're an Idaho lawmaker and you want to talk to us about what's really going on with lobbyists at the State House, Andrew, myself, or Brian Holmes would love to talk with you.
Ears always open.
All right. Thanks, Andrew.